All right. Okay, so we will get right to it. So we're going to talk a little bit about the three main components that it takes to improve your releve and your pointe. And we're going to talk a lot about arch height as well. One thing also I didn't mention before, but I want to make sure you guys know, I did write a blog post that goes along with today's video. So if you, again, go to the link in my bio and click on most recent blog, all of this information plus some extra stuff is going to be there a little bit more in detail for you guys. So if you don't end up being able to watch the entire video, you can get all the information over there as well. Okay, so the three main components that we're looking at when we are assessing the height of your arch and your releve are mobility, stability and strength, and motor control. And you guys hear me talk about these three components a lot. And so it's the same thing in the foot. And the reason that that is so important is we have to have a balance between all three of these things in order to really see a change and make sure that you're working on the right elements. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is mobility. So for a dancer to safely be able to go on pointe, or even just have like those pretty long lines of a pointed foot, we need something called plantar flexion. So plantar flexion is pointing the foot, okay? And a dancer needs at least 90 degrees. So if we're looking like at an angle of the foot, let me sit down here. So if I look at, so 90 or 0, I guess would be this right angle here. I need a dancer to be able to get to 90 degrees this way, okay? So that's how we measure plantar flexion. If you don't have that straight line there, it's going to be really challenging for you to get up safely onto a pointe shoe. It also isn't going to give you that nice pretty line that every dancer is looking for, right? It's good if you don't have that full 90 degrees, there's going to be kind of a broken line on the ankle here, which isn't as pretty, right? So we want to be able to get that 90 degrees of plantar flexion there. So if you are somebody that is lacking that full range of motion and plantar flexion, you're going to have a really hard time fully getting up onto your pointe shoe. So if you're wondering how to assess to make sure that you have the right amount of plantar flexion, I want you to head over to that blog post that I mentioned. The link is in my bio, and there is a quick little test that you guys can check for yourselves there. I want to show you guys the exercises for it. So it's a pretty easy stretch to try to maintain or achieve that increased plantar flexion. So what you're going to do is you're going to be sitting, and you're going to take one foot and cross it over the other, and you're going to basically just grab onto the top part of the foot here, and then I'm going to kind of stabilize at my ankle, or like right around my heel, and I'm going to take wrapped around what are called the metatarsals, so like the middle portion of my foot, not my toes, but the middle portion of my foot. I'm going to grab there, and I'm just going to point my foot. And sometimes what I will do is use that other hand on my heel and kind of push upward a little, just to give a little extra stretch. And I'm just trying to elongate through the front of the ankle. Now, if I want an increased stretch, I can move that hand down onto my toes. And when I plantar flex or point my foot, if I also curl the toes as I do this, I'm gonna get an extra little bit of a stretch there, and you should feel it right in the tendons along the front of the ankle. So that's gonna give me a little bit more flexibility through there. Now I need to be able to make sure that it's a functional flexibility. So holding it is going to give you a decent amount. However, I need to be able to make sure I can use it. So if you extend that foot out, you should also be able to point the foot now and achieve that 90-degree mark. But a lot of people will feel the stretch across the front of the ankle just by doing that. So make sure that if you are not feeling anything by pulling across this way, make sure that you have that functional flexibility as well, and that you can actually get the range of motion when you are doing it actively without pulling from your hands. Now again, if I want a little bit of a stretch across the front of the tendons, I'm gonna point from the ankle, but then I'm gonna purposely curl my toes under. And you guys will actually see I'm a little bit tight through the front of my ankle, so I can't really curl my toes very far. But I wanna make sure the ankle is pointed first. If I'm here and I curl my toes and then point, I'm not gonna get that same stretch. So ankle is flexed through here first, then the toes are gonna curl under, and you should feel a little bit of a pull across the top of the ankle. So that's how you can get some functional flexibility through there. Now the other part of mobility, that's, talking about plantar flexion is important, again, for getting up onto point and just pointing like on the gesture leg, but we also have to make sure we have enough range of motion for when we go into like a demi-point or releve position. And so for that, not only do I need the range of motion in the ankle, but I also now need the range of motion in the foot and in the toes to be able to fully get up onto releve. So what we're looking at there is what is the range of motion in your first toe joint, okay? And it's pretty easy to assess this actually. Again, if you just cross one leg over, just grab onto that big toe and then you're gonna pull back. And how far can you pull back that toe? You should ideally be able to get to about a 90-degree angle. And actually this is good because I don't have good range of motion here. So you guys will be able to see when I pull my toe back, I can really only get to maybe like 60 degrees. I can't go any further than that. But I really want to be able to have a 90-degree angle there. So that's a quick way that you can check it yourself, so that when you go into your releve, I have that, again, it's roughly 90 degrees, but I have that full range of motion to be able to extend through the toe and through the ankle to keep my heels up and my arch height really nice. If I don't have that range of motion, when I raise up, my heels are gonna feel like they're kind of sagging down a little bit, and no matter how hard you try, you can't get any higher. So mobility has to come first. Now, once you have the mobility down, we also have to look at what is the strength in the ankle. Mobility will say only so much. Like if I don't have the range of motion, no matter how hard I try, I'm not gonna be able to get there, right? But say I have enough mobility, and I will tell you most of the time dancers do have the mobility. So I've got the mobility, but if I'm not strong enough to work through the entire range of motion, it still doesn't matter. I have to be able to lift my entire body weight up into that releve position. Or even more so, when you're going on point, I need to be able to lift through the entire range of motion into the elevate. So I have to have a really strong and stable ankle. So one thing that I usually will have my dancers do right off the bat, just to kind of do like a quick little baseline test, if you stand on a single leg and just do some releves or heel raises, how many in a row can you do? Now, ideally, you need to be able to get to about 25 or 30 on a single leg without taking a break while maintaining good alignment at the same time. So when I come up, I want to make sure that the knee is staying nice and extended and I'm not like bending to get into my releve. I'm not leaning with my trunk at all. I'm not going off balance. So I do want to make sure that you can get that full, and the full range of motion as well when you do that test. So it's a quick and easy way that you guys can kind of assess it yourself. And then if you find that you're having a problem, that you can't get through all 25 to 30 reps of that without compensating or fatiguing too much, that's a sign right there that we need to focus a lot on your strengthening. All too often do I see dancers forget this piece. They stretch and stretch and stretch, and really, that may not be the issue. So if you have stretched your feet a ton and you're not noticing any difference in your arch height, I'm telling you, it is not in the flexibility at that point. You've got to take a look at the strength component. That is probably the single most important thing that I want to stress to you guys today, because it's the biggest problem that I see, that the biggest thing that people do incorrectly. Okay, so how do we strengthen that releve so that you have that nice pretty arch height? We have a couple different options. I'm just gonna go through a couple with you guys today. One being just a standard heel raise or releve. So there's kind of a progression to this. So the first progression is gonna be on 2 feet, okay? So you're just doing standard releves on 2 feet. And then ideally, I want you not holding on to anything, because when you're dancing, for the most part, unless you're doing bar work, you have to be able to balance. So you're just doing some releves, 2 feet. The progression from that is going to be doing an eccentric heel raise. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go up on 2 feet, you're gonna shift over and come down on 1, and you wanna come down on a slow 3 count. So we're using a lot of control through that descent. So I'm coming up on 2, shift, whoop, there goes my balance. Up on 2 and down on 1. And then you can do the other side. But that slow control, you can see my eccentric needs a little bit of work, but I really want to come down that slow, gradual 1, 2, 3 count. And that also kind of gets into the next piece, the next component, which is going to be motor control. So a lot of these exercises, there will be some overlap between working mobility, strength, and motor control. So that one right there will work both strength and motor control at the same time. So something else that I want you guys to keep in mind when you are going into your releve or your heel raise, where is the weight? Because that is also going to say a lot about what your arch height is and how pretty that point looks. So no matter what, whether you are in parallel or you're in turned out, if you're on 2 feet or 1 feet, the goal is that your weight is going to be centered between the 2nd and 3rd toe, okay? We want to make sure that you are not going into a winged position, which would be where all the weight is on that first toe joint. And it's going to create kind of, again, a broken line in my ankle. I'm winging out a little too much. We also want to make sure that you are not sickling, of course. This is the direction every dancer is extra careful about. But what happens is, to avoid the sickle, we overcompensate and go into that winged position. So you just want to be careful that when you are doing those heel raises, you're not constantly going into that winged position. The reason that's not necessarily ideal is, number one, it's going to lead to, or could potentially lead to, some overuse tendonitis because you're not working the muscles symmetrically in the ankle. But the other piece of that is it actually makes your arch height look lower. So it doesn't look as pretty because if you can see, when I go up into a releve and then I'm going to kind of wing my feet, that arch kind of drops down a little bit. Okay, what we really want to do is get you to lift the arch up, center the weight between the 2nd and 3rd toe, and now I've got that pretty arch height. Okay, so it actually is better looking and more appealing and pleasing to the eye to not be in that winged position. So if you are struggling with getting those heels up, I want you to just check and see where is your weight when you're in your releve and adjust from there. That becomes even more important when you're on a point shoe, right? So if I'm on point, I don't have a point shoe here, so we'll just pretend. If I'm on point and I'm winged and I'm over in the inside part of my toe box, again, really gonna be working the ankle in an uneven pattern, which is gonna put me at a higher risk for injuries, especially because that toe box where you're balancing is so small. And you're much less stable in that position. So being able to center over the middle of the toe box when you go on point is going to be really helpful for you guys. And it's going to give you that nice, pretty arch height. Makes the footwork a little harder. So yes, it may feel harder, but in the long run, it'll be worth it. So yeah, just something to kind of keep in mind there. So we talked about having the mobility. We've talked about having the strength and ways that you can build up some strength. Now we need to talk about getting the last piece, which is motor control, which is kind of putting it all together. So motor control is basically the ability for you to control the joint through its range of motion and make sure that you're working those muscles in sync with one another so that everything's happening kind of in the timing that it should happen. And so this piece, to me, I think is the most important of it all, because I can have really great range of motion and really great strength, but if I can't control it and put it all together, I don't really have anything. And especially, again, when you're going on point, you need a lot of control to be able to control your whole body weight on a point shoe. So when we look at motor control, a big piece of it is, what does it look like when you point your foot? And are you using the correct muscles? So again, I want to direct you guys back over to that blog that I mentioned. If you missed it in the beginning, if you head to the link in my bio, my most recent blog post is kind of covering this same topic. There is one of my YouTube videos is posted in there that will go over in detail what it should look like when you point your foot and how to use the right muscles. So to get kind of a little bit more in depth with that, go ahead and check out that blog. But so when we're looking at pointing the foot, first I'm going to look at it from a non-weight bearing position. So just pointing in the air. We want to make sure that you're using the correct muscle. So I shouldn't see the arch of your foot really scrunched up. A lot of times what I will get when people point their toe is that they do just that. They point their toe here, okay? And I'm gonna kind of exaggerate this, but they point from this part. So the toe points, okay? And what that gives me is, well, my toes are pointed, but I've got this like really scrunched up look in my foot in the arch. And I've got this broken line at my ankle. So it's not that pretty straight, long, elongated line that we want. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell you, stop pointing your toes. And I want you to rethink how you're doing it and point your ankle. So just like we kind of talked about, you need that 90 degrees of ankle plantar flexion. This is where you're going to use it, right? So I wanna point from my ankle and then the toes can follow. Okay, so my toes aren't all curled up and crunched, but they're nice and elongated, okay? And now this arch in my foot is not as scrunched up, but it's more of a elongated, pretty arch, and we've got that nice unbroken line down the center of your foot versus here, okay? So to work through the motor control, what I want you to do is practice doing it nice and slow and broken down, okay? So you are going to just work on point through the ankle, then the toes, then bring the toes back, and bring the ankle back. So we're working on rolling through the foot and articulating through each of those joints so that you have control through the entire range of motion. I'm going to grab my TheraBand here because you can also do this with a TheraBand. Here, I'll show you guys on this foot, I think. So I'm going to put the TheraBand so that it's right around the top portion of my toes here. So a lot of times you'll grab a TheraBand and just start pointing back and forth and not really thinking about what you're doing, right? Not a lot of control there. So what I want you to do is do this in a much more controlled manner. You're going to point through the ankle, so my toes are still extended. So this is basically my demi point if I were standing. And then from here, I'm gonna point through the toes nice and slow and controlled. Let the toes slowly return back, and then let the ankle return back. So I don't want the band to do the work. You want the foot to do and the toes to do the work. I don't want the band to snap me back. My muscles are gonna control it back through the range of motion, right? Again, something else to keep in mind here, just like I mentioned when you are doing a releve, where your weight has to be centered between the second and third toe, you want the same thing to happen when you are doing it without, non-weight bearing into a TheraBand, or even if you were just doing it without anything. So I wanna make sure that when you're pointing, I'm not leading with the first toe going into more of a winged pattern, and I'm also not leading with the fifth toe and going into that sickle pattern. So I'm going straight down the center, no matter how I'm pointing my foot. Okay, so then my other favorite, so that's if I'm just pointing in the air. But I also need to think about what if I am weight bearing, okay? Because I still want those pretty arches when you're weight bearing. So I'm gonna take my TheraBand, I'm gonna stand in first position, and I'm gonna tie my TheraBand around my ankles here, okay? And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna practice working through my foot, just like we did when it was non-weight bearing, but I'm gonna now be doing it standing. So I wanna make sure my arches start nice and lifted. If you guys don't know how to lift your arches or what the term doming means, again, I want you to head over to my YouTube channel or my blog. It's posted in both places so that you can learn a little bit more about what doming is. because you're gonna wanna dome at the beginning of this exercise. So I'm lifting my arches, doming. Then I'm gonna raise into my releve, and what I'm gonna focus on is pressing the fronts of my ankles into that TheraBand to try to get that nice 90-degree angle of plantar flexion and 90-degree angle of toe extension. So my arches are nice and lifted, and my heels are high in the air, and I'm getting that pretty line, right? So I'm pushing front into the TheraBand, okay? My weight is still centered between the second and third toe, just like it was for everything else, and I'm just getting that little bit of added resistance. To make this a little bit more challenging, what you can also do is you can have this, you can have your pointe shoes on and go all the way into eleve with the TheraBand. So you're really having to work through and articulate through the entire foot as you go up into either releve or eleve, and having to work that motor control a lot. So that's another really good way to be able to do that. All right, so hopefully that's given you guys some idea how to work on those three main components: the mobility, the strength and stability, and then the motor control. Those are kind of the three main things we want to look at. Hopefully gave you some idea how you can assess each of those things and then what to do for them. Again, I just want to stress to you the most important piece is determining where your actual limitation lies so that you are addressing the correct thing. Otherwise, you spend a ton of time on exercises and no change is being made unless you're actually addressing where your limitation is. So again, if you head over to my blog, this is all listed out there with the specific tests that you can do for each to make sure that you're working on and addressing the right area for you. And again, just a reminder, this replay is only going to be available for 24 hours. So if you go to the link in my bio to subscribe to the newsletter, I will send you the replay right to your inbox. So that's about do it for today, guys. If you have any questions at all, please leave them in the comments here. I can check and see if there were any questions just to answer real quick this way, or send me a DM and I'm more than happy to answer those questions. I could even do a post on the questions that you guys had. So I hope everyone has a good rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.